Before beginning this talk, which is concerning the Orthodox worldview, I'd like to say a word on why it is important to have an Orthodox worldview, or rather, why it is more difficult to have one today than it was in past centuries. In past centuries, for example, in Russia in the 19th century, in the early part at least, what we can call an Orthodox worldview was an inseparable part of daily life. It was supported by the life around it. In fact, there was no need really to speak of the separate thing, which was called the Orthodox worldview, because it was simply the same thing as leading an Orthodox life. In many countries, as in Russia, the government itself confessed Orthodox religion. It was the center of public functions, and the king, or the ruler himself, was the first Orthodox layman with the responsibility to give a Christian example to all of his subjects. Every city had Orthodox churches. Large cities had many Orthodox churches. It said that Moscow had 40 times 40, some 1,600 or so churches. Many of these churches had services every day, morning and evening. There were monasteries in all the great cities, and many small cities, outside the cities, and in the countryside, in deserts and wildernesses. In Russia there were over 1,000 monasteries altogether, officially organized monasteries, in addition to other more unofficial groups. And monasticism was an accepted part of life. Most families, in fact, had somewhere in them a sister or a brother, an uncle, a grandfather, a cousin, or someone who was a monk or a nun, in addition to all the other kinds of Orthodox examples of Orthodox life, people who wandered from monastery to monastery, fools for Christ, and the whole way of life is permeated by Orthodox kinds of people, of which, of course, monasticism is the center. Orthodox customs were a part of daily life. Most books that were commonly read were Orthodox. And daily life itself was a very difficult thing for most people without modern conveniences. People had to work hard to survive. Life expectancy was not great. Death was a frequent reality. And all of this reinforced the Church's teaching on the other world, which is real and near. Everyone could plainly see how true this was. So living an Orthodox life in such circumstances was really the same thing as having an Orthodox worldview. And there was really no need to talk about such a thing as an Orthodox worldview. Today, on the other hand, all this has changed, and changed very drastically. Our orthodoxy is a little island in the midst of a world which operates on totally different principles. And every day, these principles are changing for the worse, making us, who are Orthodox Christians, more and more alienated from it. Many people are tempted to divide their lives into two sharply distinct categories. The daily life we live at work, with worldly friends and our worldly business, and orthodoxy, which we live on Sundays and other times in the week when we have time for it. But the worldview of such a person who divides his life up this way, if we look closely at it, is often a strange combination of Christian values and worldly values, which really do not mix together very well at all. The purpose of this talk, therefore, is to see how people living today can begin to make their worldview more of one piece, to make it a whole Orthodox worldview. Orthodoxy is life. If we don't live orthodoxy, we simply are not orthodox, no matter what formal beliefs we might hold. This is the basic principle I would like to expound upon in this paper. Life today in our contemporary world has become very artificial, very uncertain, very confusing. It is true orthodoxy has a life of its own, but it is also not very far from the life of the world around us. And so the life of the Orthodox Christian, even when he's being just purely Orthodox, cannot help but reflect the life around us in some way. And so a kind of uncertainty and confusion have also entered into Orthodox life in our times. In this talk I will try to look at contemporary life and then at our Orthodox life to see how better we might fulfill our Christian obligation to lead otherworldly lives even in these quite terrible times, and to have an Orthodox Christian view of the whole of life today that will enable us to survive these times with our faith intact. Probably there will be all kinds of questions and discussion about this, which we will go into at the end. And the purpose, of course, for which we're doing this is survival, so that we might be able to survive as Orthodox Christians.